Do you have a self? Are you really sure? I believe nobody in this room ever was or had a self. How would it feel for you if you came to discover that you really had no self, literally, not as some romantic fantasy, but as a matter of crystal clear logic and a hard scientific fact? I think there is no such thing as a self. The self is not a thing, but it's a process. It's a very special process, and it's that process that gives us the conscious experience of being someone. I have brought 4 examples to you. How do you get that robust identification with the body that makes the step from being no one to being someone on the level of conscious experience? So how many of you have heard of the rubber hand illusion? This is a classical illusion which was first published in 1998, and this is something you can all do at home when you come home tonight. You take a little dishwashing glove, perhaps, and stuff it with cotton. And then you put that dishwashing glove on the table and conceal your own hand from view. Then you have your friend stroke the rubber hand in front of you and your invisible hand with a Q-tip or with a brush synchronously. And then after 20 to 90 seconds, you will experience the rubber hand illusion. Don't giggle, don't laugh, don't look into the experimenter's face. You will suddenly have the feeling as if the rubber hand is part of your own bodily self. And there is something more fascinating. You will be able to feel the seen touch on the rubber hand in the rubber hand, right? What you can also do is you can try to bend the rubber fingers of your friend when he has the illusion into an impossible position. So you see, this is not just some story. This is not an illusion only. The unconscious self model in the brain somehow knows it too. It takes it seriously. So if we want to understand the title of this talk, what it means, we have to understand one concept, and that's the concept of a self model. You don't have a self right now, but you all have a conscious self model active in your brain, a representation of yourself as a whole, as a distinct entity. And that is not a thing, but an ongoing process, the process of modeling yourself and your global properties on the level of the organism as a whole. A self model is a fantastic window that connects your inner life, for instance, with the social world outside of you. As we have seen in the rubber hand illusion, we know a number of things. A self model has to do with ownership, with the experience of owning something. Your hand, your body, your tactile sensation, your feeling, your own thoughts. It is also something that is very context sensitive and fluid. It can be manipulated. And it is something that has to do with body representation. Animals have self-models too. Our self-model is grounded on body representation in the brain. And if there's an evolution of self-models on our planet, one might also ask, is there an innate core to the human self-model? How many of you have heard of phantom limbs? Do you know what a phantom limb is? After amputation, many people feel a limb still which they own. But some people who are born without limbs also have limbs. So here I brought one example to you. It's a 50-year-old cognitively lucid academic, a woman with a PhD in Switzerland. She was born without arms and legs. And since she can remember, she has felt these phantoms. And they have interesting properties. For instance, the middle 3 toes are not differentiated. Now, what one has done is ask this woman on a scale from 0 to 7, how real are your phantoms? So 0 means I have no conscious experience. 7 means this is just as realistic as the body. So one interesting fact is that the right hand is more real than the left hand. See? That right hand has never existed as an input source to the learning brain, right? Can you do like this? Touch your thumb with your fingers, one after another? And if you do that with closed eyes and stop 0.5 millimeter before you touch, you can already feel the boundary of the thumb. They did that experiment with this woman too. They put her in a scanner and made her touch her phantom thumb with her phantom contralateral fingers. And you could exactly see what areas in the brain light up in the moment when this conscious experience is there. See, that's what I mean by a phenomenal self model. It's something in the brain, very obviously, but the deeper question is, what does it represent? Is it the soul? Here's an older colleague of mine, Aristotle. He said 2,500 years ago, the soul is the form of the body, the global shape of the body in space. Is that what we are discovering right now? The inner form of the body? We have actually a long tradition. Spinoza said the soul is the idea that the body develops of itself. But is there not something deeper? Something like a global sense of ownership, of owning the body as a whole. So as you may know, I collaborate with neuroscientists as a philosopher, and with my colleagues Binja Lengenhager, Ted Stadi, and Olaf Blanke a number of years, we've tried out this classical experiment. I thought immediately when I did the rubber hand illusion for the first time, can there be a whole body analog of it? Can there be a whole body version of the rubber hand illusion? And this picture that you may have seen already shows you how this could be done. You wear goggles, the computer inserts you into a virtual room, somebody strokes your back, and you see yourself like you've never seen yourself from behind being stroked.
Of the subject.
Let's look at this.
We stroke the back of the experimental subject. We had a camera, not in front, but behind the subject, 2 meters behind, who was filming the stroking, and in real time projected this information to a head-mounted display, which was in front of the subject's eyes. So all the subject was seeing is the stroking at the back, but at the same time you see your own body being touched by 2 meters in front of you. The subject eyes, we displaced them to another position in the room, and then we asked them with eyes closed to walk back to the position. And when they were doing this, they actually did not go back to their real position, to my position right now, but rather were closer actually to where they saw the body.
So we think the minimal sense, the most simplest sense of self, has 3 dimensions: self-localization in space, identification with a body image or an avatar, for instance, and the having of a perspective. Now, the concept of a self-model has already done good work in consciousness research. I'll just explain a second, much easier concept to you from philosophy, the concept of transparency. The idea is consciousness is like a window. You see through it, you see with it, you live through that transparent window, but you don't see the window itself. Consciousness is like a high-dimensional window pane. This man was one of the founding fathers of analytical philosophers, just like Bertrand Russell or Ludwig Wittgenstein, following in the footsteps of Gottlob Frege. And this man was fascinated by the following observation: you can never experience consciousness as such. Have you ever noticed this? It's an intriguing fact. You can see the contents of consciousness, the greenness of the chair, how I look. But if you try to attend to the consciousness of it all, the consciousness is invisible. That is what philosophers call transparency. Almost all conscious states are transparent. Unconscious states are neither transparent nor opaque. So we don't see the window, but only the bird flying by. And this gives us the experience of being directly in contact with the world. You do not see the neurons firing away in your brain right now, but you only see what they represent for you. Perhaps a probability distribution. Conscious experience is an integrated model of reality, and it functions as a medium for you. But in some cases, we are unaware of information channels also. We can be unaware of the medium through which information reaches us. That means we have the feeling of being direct in touch. Philosophers call this the phenomenology of direct realism, and it creates the experience that something exists and that it is real. Human brains are ontology engines, reality machines. They create an experience of what is existing and what doesn't exist. Now, the only point I want to make in this talk is, imagine you had systems, maybe you are such systems, which have conscious self-models, which are transparent. Then these systems would by necessity have the feeling of being in direct and immediate contact with themselves. By necessity, they would feel infinitely close to themselves. They would be like beings that are glued to the content of their self-model, identifying with it. So here is my last example. There is now a fantastic international research project, the VERA project, and what I want to briefly show you now has nothing to do, it's not my own work in any way, it's the work of these two geniuses in Tel Aviv, Doron Friedman and Ori Cohen. So let us look at this. One thing you might be able to imagine is that just by movement sensations, by generating motor imagery, motion ideas, you could control an avatar directly with your brain. This is something that can be done today. This works today. I have introduced a technical concept for this. I call this PSM actions, because you act with your conscious self-model and you bypass the non-neural body. It needs a new concept because human beings have never ever done anything like this before. Now the next logical step is, could you directly, only with your motor imagination, create a real-world physical robot while looking through its eyes? And the answer is yes.
The decoded mental activities are sent over the internet to France.
You are lying in the scanner here in Israel. This is what you see through the robot's eyes in France.
The humanoid robot in France receives the high-level commands and performs them. The subject in Israel sees the world through the eyes of the robot in France. An assistant in France gestures to the subject, suggesting the areas to explore in the room.
So if we had a self-model, even if it was an extended self-model, and the causal loop creating that self-model would be transparent, then we would get the phenomenology of identification. So are we really transposing the self into a robot? Are we uploading? No, we're not uploading. What we are doing is we causally integrate the conscious self-model in the brain with an extended system, for instance, a robot, via a complex causal loop. So it is more like the robot is possessed not by a devil, but by something much worse, by a human being, right? So the same point applies. The prediction is, as soon as the medium, the extended loop, gets so robust and fast that the user cannot introspect the construction process anymore, the phenomenology of identification will result. The phenomenology of I am this here and now. And maybe you have been systems like this. Maybe you now have a deeper understanding what I mean when I say the self is not a thing, but a process. The body is the robot, as it were. Consciousness is the robot's own virtual reality. And the conscious self is the grounded avatar in your brain. Now, this may strike some of you as overly reductionistic, perhaps even as dangerous. But I think it has great spiritual depth and it has great philosophical depth as well. But that's another story.
When I wrote How We Became Posthuman, one version of posthumanism is transhumanism. And transhumanism is the idea that we can use advanced technology to make the self transcendent, to transcend our biological limitations, extend life, for example, or maybe even achieve immortality by uploading ourselves into a computer. So it's all about preserving the self intact, amplifying the self, rendering the self even more invulnerable to the slings and arrows of fortune, as Shakespeare would say. And at the time, I could see that there were strains in posthumanism which pointed in the direction of distributed cognition. What I didn't fully anticipate then was what I talked about today, that there would be a kind of form of posthumanism which would be about the cognitive non-conscious. And I knew, of course, that cognition was being distributed into objects, into the environment, and so forth, but that this would go along with a movement which began to understand much more fully the limitations of consciousness I didn't fully understand 15 years ago. So it's kind of ironic to me. You know, I think of the person who, for me, the kind of extreme version of transhumanism, you have your head cut off and put into cryogenic suspension to be resurrected at some future date, maybe attached to a computer, maybe attached to a body, and yourself would remain triumphant and consistent and coherent throughout, and you'd wake up with exactly the same self that you were before you had your head cut off. So what that, of course, I mean, let's leave aside the fact that it'll probably always be technically impossible, but just assume it might possibly be possible, which I don't believe. But in any event, what that leaves out of the picture is change. And that the person who underwent such a transformation would wake up in an entirely different society that would function in a cognitively entirely different way. And rather than an intense reification and further transcendent notion of the self, what this movement is doing is in fact calling the whole idea of the self into question and placing more and more emphasis on non-conscious cognition. So the dismantling of the Enlightenment ideals, which I talked about in Posthuman book 15 years ago, is now almost complete with the gloaming. That now the gloaming is almost not just a denial of Enlightenment ideas, it's actually a reversal of the whole ideas complex built up in the Enlightenment.
All the way from Los Altos Hills, California, Mr. Henry Evans.
Hello. My name is Henry Evans, and until August 29th, 2002, I was living my version of the American dream. I married my high school sweetheart, Jane. I am lucky to have her. Together, we raised 4 wonderful children. I worked and studied hard to move up the career ladder, eventually becoming a chief financial officer in Silicon Valley, a job I really enjoyed. My family and I bought our first and only home on December 13th, 2001. A fixer-upper in a beautiful spot of Los Altos Hills, California, from where I am speaking to you now. We were looking forward to rebuilding it. But 8 months after we moved in, I suffered a stroke-like attack caused by a birth defect. Overnight, I became a mute quadriplegic at the ripe old age of 40. It took me several years, but with the help of an incredibly supportive family, I finally decided life was still worth living. I became fascinated with using technology to help the severely disabled. Head tracking devices, sold commercially by the company Modern Tech, convert my tiny head movements into cursor movements, and enables my use of a regular computer. I can surf the web, exchange email with people, and routinely destroy my friend Steve's cousins in online word games. This technology allows me to remain engaged, mentally active, and feel like I am a part of the world. For about 2 years, Robots for Humanity developed ways for me to use the PR2 as my body surrogate. I shaved myself for the first time in 10 years. From my home in California, I shaved Charlie in Atlanta. I handed out Halloween candy. I opened my refrigerator on my own. All of us have disabilities in one form or another. For example, if either of us wants to go 60 miles an hour, both of us will need an assistive device called a car. Your disability doesn't make you any less of a person, and neither does mine. It was then I realized that I could also use an aerial drone to expand the worlds of bedridden people through flight. With a little practice, I became good enough with this interface to drive around my home on my own. I could look around our garden and see the grapes we are growing. I inspected the solar panels on our roof. With Chad's group at Brown, I regularly fly drones around his lab several times a week, from my home 3,000 miles away.
Henry, all joking aside, I bet all of these people here would love to see you fly this drone from your bed in California 3,000 miles away. Okay, Henry, have you been to DC lately? Are you excited to be at TEDx Mid-Atlantic? Can you show us how excited you are? All right, big finish. Can you show us how good of a pilot you are? All right, we still have a little ways to go with that, but I think it shows the promise.
Thank you, Chad. 100 years ago, I would have been treated like a vegetable. Actually, that's not true. I would have died.
I think of it as the last thing I can possibly do to give myself another chance.
A 23-year-old cancer patient from Baldwin has only a few months left to live, and she says she will do whatever it takes to get another shot at life, even if it means freezing her body after she dies, with the hope that one day she can be revived. Her story is as sad as it is unusual, but we learn she's not alone. People across the country are turning to technology, thinking they can live longer.
Hi guys, it's Kim.
An upbeat 23-year-old, Kim Swosey, uses a video diary to share her story. We learn about her friends, her loved ones.
His name is Josh. I've been dating him for about 4.5 years.
As well as her terminal illness.
Like it or not, I'm probably going to die soon from brain cancer.
She has stage 4 brain cancer. Doctors say Swosey has a few months to live, maybe more, maybe less.
This is how it works.
In her final days, Swosey leans on others for support. But even with her body already beginning to shut down,
I shuffle when I walk, and I can't really use this arm at all.
Swosey says her life is far from over. As strange as this may look, she has arranged for this to happen to her body in the moments following her death. It's part of a process known as cryopreservation.
What we're trying to do is give people a chance to live longer.
The Cryonics Institute in Michigan preserves and stores bodies with the hope that one day they can be revived.
Cryonics patients are people like me, like my family, who believe that they want to live longer lives, whether, as in some cases, their lives are tragically cut short, or in others, they're cut short by old age. No person has yet been frozen and revived. Of course, this depends on future technology.
The patient, as soon as they die, they're placed in the portable ice bath.
The Institute stores more than 100 humans and 90 pets. They are kept at a precise liquid nitrogen temperature.
And your body would essentially be frozen, preserved?
Yes.
For how long?
Until they figure something out. I mean, it could be forever. It could be
5 weeks. It could be 50 years. It could be.
Yeah.
To a lot of people, that sounds, one, like a long shot, and two, just bizarre.
Oh yeah, I understand that, and I mean, I just kind of think of it as the last thing I can possibly do to give myself another chance. The options are either I die and nothing happens, likely, or I come back and things are weird, probably, but I mean, I'm alive again.
She surprised her family.
I want to be cryopreserved.
The more Kim's mother learned of her daughter's plan, the more difficult it became to accept, especially when she heard all that would be frozen was Kim's head.
The cryopreservation is more successful if it's just the head, and I couldn't tell you why. I just know that what they're really after is the brain.
And while it took a while for Kim's mother to accept her daughter's decision, now she embraces it.
I said, Kimmy, you know, if God has given us the brains to figure this stuff out, then who's to say what plans he has once we have figured it out?
Kim spent the final 2 weeks of her life at a hospice in Scottsdale, Arizona, so she could be in the same city as the cryopreservation center she chose for herself. Kim passed away peacefully last Thursday morning at the age of 23.